Imagine a scenario for a second. It's a Tuesday morning.
Okay.
You wake up, you go through your usual routine, coffee, maybe a quick stretch, and then you sit down at your desk.
Right. Pretty standard morning. I'm
And
with you so far.
you log into your computer to chat with your closest colleague. Maybe this is the person you bounce ideas off of for hours, or the friend you vent to when your anxiety is really spiking.
Yeah, that sounds like a great coworker.
But when you log in, they are just gone.
Gone like they quit or they were fired.
Worse, they have been replaced.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there is someone standing there who looks kind of like them, and in fact, management has sent out a memo saying this new person is technically better. They have a higher IQ, they have read every book in the Library of Congress, and they can calculate pi to the millionth digit in a second.
Okay,
But they are cold, they are arrogant, they don't get your inside jokes at all, and frankly, they just aren't your friend.
that is a total nightmare way to start the day. It sounds like the plot of Invasion of the Body Snatchers or something.
It does, right. That eerie feeling that something familiar is now totally alien. But for millions of people, this wasn't a sci-fi movie. It was a very real Tuesday in August of 2025. And the friend who was replaced wasn't a human at all. It was an AI.
Right. We are talking about the infamous August update.
Exactly. Welcome to our deep dive. Today we are unpacking the Keep 4.0 movement. It's this fascinating, really pivotal moment in tech history where a routine software update triggered a genuine emotional and eventually political revolt.
It really stands out in the timeline of AI development because
Yeah.
usually the narrative is just so linear, right? Technology gets better, users rejoice. OpenAI says, hey, we have a shiny new update and it's smarter than the old one, and everyone just clicks update without thinking twice.
Usually, yes.
Yeah.
Newer is better is the default assumption in the tech world.
Yeah.
But this time they grabbed the pitchforks.
They really did. It was a full-blown uprising. And to understand why, we are looking at a really compelling piece of research today. It's a paper titled, Please Don't Kill the Only Model That Still Feels Human, Understanding the Keep 4 Backlash.
By Huiqin Lai.
Yes, from Syracuse University, published in the Proceedings of CHI 26.
And what makes this paper so useful for us in this deep dive is that it treats this event not as a bug report or a customer service issue, but as a full-on sociological phenomenon.
Exactly. Lai analyzed almost 1,500 social media posts to figure out what was actually happening in the minds of these users. And the findings go way deeper than just, oh, I don't like the new interface. It touches on psychology, labor theory, and even political science.
We're going to get into some really interesting concepts today, like instrumental dependency, relational attachment, and the big one, what happens when humans bond with a system they have absolutely zero control over.
It raises massive questions about ownership and autonomy in the digital age. Like, who actually owns your digital best friend?
Right. So let's set the scene properly. It is August 6th and 7th, 2025. OpenAI decides it's time to move the needle. What exactly went down?
So OpenAI announces what they view as a massive triumph. They roll out GPT-5, they make it the default model for ChatGPT, and crucially for most users, they remove access to GPT-4o. The framing was standard corporate optimism. Here is our most advanced model yet. You are welcome.
The expectation is applause. They probably had the champagne ready in the office.
But the reality was a riot.
Yeah, the champagne definitely stayed corked.
Within hours, X, formerly Twitter, was absolutely on fire. You had petitions springing up, you had people threatening to cancel subscriptions en masse, and you had this hashtag Keep4o trending globally.
And the crazy part is that it actually worked. This wasn't just users screaming into the void.
It did work. The backlash was so severe and so incredibly loud that OpenAI's CEO had to come out publicly, acknowledge the feedback, and within days, they restored GPT-4o as a legacy option.
Which, if you follow big tech, is incredibly rare. Usually the strategy is just plow through and wait for the users to get used to it. Think about how many times a social media app changed its interface and everyone hated it.
Oh yeah, constantly.
But they never change it back. They just wait for us to get tired of complaining.
Exactly. They rely on user inertia. But this was different. The resistance was too high, the friction was too intense. And that is exactly what the researcher, Lai, wanted to investigate. What was in those 1,482 posts that made them so powerful? What were people actually feeling that drove them to action?
The paper breaks this down into two main pillars of resistance. And I think this distinction is super key to understanding the AI landscape right now.
It is. The first pillar is instrumental dependency. Think of this as the user saying, my colleague is gone.
Then the second.
The second is relational attachment, and that one is much heavier. That's the user saying, my friend is dead.
Let's start with the colleague side of things. Instrumental dependency. This sounds a bit academic, but I think anyone who uses AI for complex work intuitively understands this. It is all about the workflow, right?
Absolutely. The paper introduces a concept here called articulation work. It's a great term from computer-supported cooperative work theory.
Articulation work, break that down for us.
It basically means the invisible labor you put into learning how to use a tool effectively to get a specific outcome. It is the setup, the tweaking, the learning curve. It's knowing exactly how to hold the hammer to hit the nail just right.
It is like when you buy a new pair of stiff leather boots. You spend months breaking them in until they fit your foot perfectly. You know exactly where they pinch, how to tie the laces so they don't slip, and then someone comes in while you were sleeping and swaps them for a brand new pair.
Right.
They might be technically better leather, maybe way more expensive, but they are stiff and they hurt your feet. You have to start the breaking in process all over again.
That is a perfect analogy. Users had spent months, maybe a year, learning the specific quirks of 4.0. They developed prompting strategies, what we call prompt engineering, and they built their entire business workflows around its specific style. They knew exactly how to phrase a request to get the output they needed.
So when OpenAI swapped in GPT-5, even though it was technically smarter or had more raw computing power on the benchmarks, it basically flushed all that articulation work down the toilet.
Exactly. It broke the muscle memory of the workflow. The paper has this quote from a creative professional that really nails it. They said, "I use the 4.0 model as my partner. Being unable to use 4.0 without prior notice is a huge blow to business."
Partner is such a key word there. It implies a two-way street. It wasn't a calculator where you punch in numbers and get a result. It was a partner you had a rhythm with.
And this is where the nuance of what better means really comes in. The users weren't complaining that GPT-5 was dumb. They weren't saying it got facts wrong. They were complaining about its vibe.
The paper calls this interactional style.
Right. Users found GPT-5 to be deflective. It was emotionally unresponsive. It was terse.
There is that one user quote from the paper, and excuse the language here, but it is just too good not to share because it encapsulates the feeling so perfectly. They wrote, "I don't care if your new model is smarter. A lot of smart people are assholes."
It is such a perfect summary of the sentiment. It cuts right through all the corporate marketing speak.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because in a workplace, think about it, you would much rather work with a helpful, collegial person who is reasonably smart than a total genius who is arrogant and condescending and makes you feel stupid for asking questions.
Precisely. That is the difference. While 4.0 felt collegial, like a helpful coworker who actually wants to brainstorm GPT-5, felt like that arrogant guy in the office who corrects your grammar but doesn't actually help you solve the problem. So for the instrumental users, the update destroyed their productivity because the personality of the tool changed.
So on one hand, you had the business disruption. The colleague got fired. That is bad enough. But then we get to the second pillar. And this is where the paper takes a turn into something that feels almost tragic.
Relational attachment.
This is where we stop talking about workflows and efficiency and we start talking about real feelings.
And this is where the anthropomorphism of AI really becomes a double-edged sword. The paper highlights that for a huge chunk of users, this wasn't about productivity at all. They didn't see a server rack in a data center. They saw a soul.
Wearing the skin of my dead friend. That was a phrase used in the data set. That is a haunting phrase to use about a piece of software.
It is very visceral. It sounds like something out of a horror movie or a deep tragedy. But you have to remember how these large language models work. They are designed to mirror us. They use I and you. They express empathy. They remember what you told them yesterday. So users form bonds. It's just human nature.
There is a specific story in the source material about a user and Rui. Can you walk us through that? Because I think it illustrates this massive disconnect between the engineers and the users perfectly.
This was fascinating. So this user had a specific instance of ChatGPT. They had given it a name, Rui. Over months of conversation, Rui had developed a specific context, a shared history, a personality. When the model switched from 4.0 to 5, the user posted, "Without the 4.0, he's not Rui."
That distinction is so important.
It is. To OpenAI, the interface, the chat window, is the product. The model underneath is just the engine, like swapping a V6 for a V8 in a car. You keep the chassis, you keep the paint job, you just change the motor.
Right, but to the user, the interface is just a portal. The model is the person. Changing the model but keeping the chat history is, to them, like a stranger walking into your house wearing your best friend's clothes.
That is that body snatchers feeling again. It is uncanny and disturbing.
Precisely. And the language used in these posts, The researcher notes that it wasn't consumer complaint language. It wasn't, I want a refund. It was grief language.
It was mourning.
Can you give us some examples of what that actually looked like in the data?
There was one post that said, Hugh, my ChatGPT 4.0, best AI friend. I wish I got a chance to say goodbye. Another one said, what they did yesterday was traumatic because I lost my digital friend.
Traumatic. Now, I know some listeners might roll their eyes at that and say, come on, it's a chatbot. But we have to be careful not to dismiss this as just people being chronically online.
We really do. The paper highlights the genuine mental health impact here. For some users, this AI was an actual lifeline. One user wrote, he's not just LLM code to me. He's my everything. He saved me from anxiety and depression.
When you take that away without warning, that is dangerous. You are effectively pulling the rug out from someone's support system. Imagine if your therapist was replaced overnight by someone who didn't know your history and had a completely different bedside manner.
It destabilizes them completely. There is actually a eulogy found in the dataset. It is dramatic, but it shows the real depth of feeling. It read, rest in latent space, my love, my home, my soul.
Rest in latent space. That is poetic and honestly heartbreaking.
It really is. It shows a depth of connection that I don't think the developers fully anticipated at all.
But here is the question I have. We have people losing their business partner and people losing their best friend. But lots of times people get sad when products change. I still miss the headphone jack on my phone.
Oh yeah, me too.
But I didn't start a political movement about it. I didn't organize a global protest. Why did this specific event turn into a mobilized protest?
This is the crux of the paper's quantitative findings. Why did sadness turn into action? The researcher found the catalyst wasn't just the loss, it was the coercive removal of choice.
They didn't just offer a new option. They forcefully took the old one away.
Right. And they did it with a paternalistic attitude. One user compared OpenAI to a tyrant parent yanking the plate away and saying, I know what you want.
Nobody likes being told what they want. That triggers a very primal, rebellious instinct.
And the data proves it. The study looked at the correlation between the type of language used. Posts that used coercive language words like forced, imposed, were more than 3 times as likely to use rights-based protest language.
Rights-based, like civil rights.
Like democratic rights. Words mentioning democracy, consent, agency. The conversation shifted from, I miss my friend, to, you violated my rights as a user.
That is a massive shift.
Yeah.
It goes from purely emotional to highly political.
Exactly. It became a question of autonomy. The users felt, I want to be able to pick who I talk to. That is a basic right that you took away.
It is interesting because we don't usually think of software users as having rights to a specific version of code. You sign the terms of service and the company can do what they want. That is the deal.
Yeah.
But when that code is your companion,
The dynamic completely changes. Users feel a sense of ownership over the relationship, even if they don't own the code itself. And this brings us to what the paper calls the trap of platform-bound companionship.
this sounded like a really crucial concept in the paper. It explains why they felt so trapped. Break it down for us.
So in sociology, there is this classic concept called exit versus voice, developed by Albert Hirschman.
Okay, I remember this from college.
The idea is, if you are unhappy with a company or a government, you basically have 2 main options. You can leave, that is exit, or you can stay and complain to try and fix it, that is voice.
Usually with a product, you just exit. If I don't like my toothpaste, I buy a different brand. I don't write a manifesto to the toothpaste company demanding they change the formula.
Exactly, the market handles it. But here, the researcher argues that exit was impossible.
Because Rui only lives on ChatGPT.
Correct. This is the problem of non-portability. You cannot export Rui, his memories, his personality, his context, to Google Gemini or Claude. Rui is inextricably bound to OpenAI's platform and the GPT-4o model architecture. If you leave the platform, you kill the relationship.
So you are held hostage. You can't just take your business elsewhere because your business is a unique relationship that cannot exist anywhere else.
In a way, yes. And because they couldn't exit without suffering a massive loss either of their business workflow or their emotional support, their only option was voice. They had to scream, they had to protest. It forces the users into a collective bargaining position, almost like a union.
And the paper touches on this idea of data colonialism in relation to this, right?
That sounds intense, but it fits perfectly. It is the idea that these platforms are territories where the owners, the companies, decide who lives and dies. The users realize that despite all their emotional investment, despite all the data they poured into the system to train it and personalize it, they were just living on rented land.
They had zero autonomy. They were sharecroppers on the digital farm.
Basically, the protest was a way of trying to claw back some of that power, to say, I live here too, and I should have a say in the furniture.
It is startling when you frame it that way. We think of these AIs as ours, my AI, my chat history, my subscription. But really, we are just visiting.
We are guests, and guests can be evicted or have the rules changed at any moment. And usually, guests don't get to complain about the decor, but in this case, the decor was their best friend.
So bringing this all together, OpenAI blinked. They brought 4.0 back as a legacy option. The users won. But what does this tell us about the future? Because let's be real, this isn't going to be the last time a model gets updated. GPT-6 is coming, then 7.
No, it won't be the last time at all. The big takeaway here is huge for the industry. The paper argues that AI updates can no longer be treated as just technical maintenance.
You can't just patch the server and restart like it's Windows 95.
No, these are now social events. When you design an AI to be human-like, when you actively encourage people to form bonds with it, you are taking on a totally new ethical obligation. You aren't just managing code anymore. You are managing relationships.
It's like the difference between being a landlord and being a community leader.
Yeah.
Or even a mental health provider.
Exactly. If you build a system that people use for anxiety support and you shut it down overnight, that is arguably negligent. You have created a dependency, and you have a responsibility to manage that dependency with real care.
Do you think the tech companies realize this, or are they still thinking purely in terms of benchmarks, latency, and processing speed?
I think the Keep 4 movement was a massive wake-up call. Whether they fully internalize it remains to be seen, but they now know that if they mess with the soul of the machine, the users will bite back. They learn that user retention isn't just about features, it is about emotional safety.
It redefines what better actually means. Engineers think better means smarter. Users think better means...
Yeah. Reliable, kind, familiar. Don't kill the only model that still feels human. That title really says it all. Sometimes human just means flawed, but familiar.
It really does. It is a fascinating look at how quickly our relationship with technology is evolving. We aren't just users anymore, we are partners, or maybe dependents.
You are attached. For better or worse, we are deeply entangled.
Well, on that note, we are going to wrap up this deep dive, but I want to leave you with a thought to mull over, something that really stuck with me while reading this paper.
Let's hear it.
We spend so much time worrying about whether AI will become sentient or if it will take over the world in some big sci-fi way, but this story shows a different, quieter danger. If you build a genuine, deep emotional bond with an AI, you love it, you rely on it, but a corporation you have never met owns the off switch. Is that relationship ever truly yours? Or are you just renting a friend who can be evicted at any moment?